Brian, it's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out today.
Of course, yeah, my pleasure.
So I'm looking forward to getting into your world of being a CEO and all of these business ventures. You have a fascinating resume here. But to begin with, 5 years ago, this pandemic was really taking hold. How much of living through that time period has affected the way that you do things today?
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel like it's such an interesting topic to look back to, especially being in the tech world, because in this weird, perverse way, the pandemic was very good for tech. All of the manual processes that we were doing that you had to go and talk to somebody face to face, that was kind of outside the world of like what technology could do.
Yeah.
And when the pandemic hit, everybody in the world was sort of looking for ways like, well, how do we bring stuff online? And so I always feel like everybody in the tech industry, maybe they're not willing to admit it, but there's sort of this strange thing of like obviously it's one of the worst things that I've personally gone through, but in some ways I think a lot of people in tech, there was this weird silver lining where things started to work from a business perspective. And
Yeah.
so even prior to the pandemic, I was mostly working remotely. Kind of right when the pandemic started happening in 2020, I was at a business here in San Antonio. We were just talking about San Antonio,
Yeah.
and we were in the office, a couple of days a week, but we would still do some remote work. And right at the beginning, I switched to a business that was already doing remote work.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a weird thing where I feel like for my personal life didn't didn't necessarily change from like a process, from a day to day, already being at a remote company, already working with an international team. But, there's this kind of like, it was definitely very strange that there was like this specter looming over like everything.
Yep.
And I was just chatting actually with somebody the other day about the pandemic, and it feels to me like it was like 20 years ago.
I know.
Some people were sharing some of the things that what people were saying, and people were reacting sort of, like March 2020 of the pandemic. And it's like, wow, this feels like an entire lifetime ago, but it was really, in the grand scheme of things, it was really just like right around the corner, to where we are now.
The one thing that's interesting about technology is that people were kind of on the fence of as far as can people do this remotely? Do we have
Mhm.
the tools? And I
Yep.
think there was an absolute confirmation during that time period. Yeah, you can do anything you want remotely. You have all the tools. And even this now, what we're doing with podcasting.
Right.
Podcasting, I've been doing it since 2011 in earnest. And when it got to be this hip thing and it was in TV shows and everybody talked about it, it's the new marketing tool. It's like, wait. What fever dream did I wake up out of? Because
Right.
it was just kind of this weird niche thing where people didn't even know what podcasting was, what a podcast was. Now it's like part of our culture. It's what people talk about all the time.
Yeah, I think it's exactly right. And what you would see too, it's funny to make the comparison because if you looked at the early podcasts, they would set up like a radio show and they would have guests come in, they had a studio set up, and it's kind of like, well, we're just doing this exact same thing that we're doing before, but now we're doing it, through this new distribution channel. And now it's like, yeah, podcasts are totally different. They're mostly remote. And as it turns out, like everybody's got, I've got a Shure mic here. Like everybody's got some sort of, everybody spent $300 to $500 on a microphone. If you spend any amount of time talking to people through a computer, everybody's got pretty good gear. Even the gear has gotten a lot better. Not to go down a total tangent, but I had an SM7B that I had set up here in my office, I had it through an interface, and I had a cloud lifter, and it's just like, and it's had all this ground noise, and I was like, I'm kind of formerly a musician. I used to be in a heavy metal band, so I kind of have a little bit of experience with that stuff, but it was kind of like if you're just trying to do your job, it's pretty annoying to
Yeah.
be like troubleshooting audio equipment. And now like this microphone plugs directly into USB-C. The signal is totally clear, works great, sounds awesome, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think it's just like that constant evolution of like, we kind of when things change in a major way, we sort of say like, okay, well, what's the closest approximation of like how are we doing this before this major change? And then
Yeah.
we like as humans, we kind of just clone that one for one. And which kind of works actually. It's kind of smart to do
Yeah.
it that way. But then we're like, okay, well, now what can we kind of strip away, and what's actually unique about this situation? What's different about it? And so yeah, I feel like it's kind of the case with tech and remote work. It's been the case with podcasts. Kind of, I mean, probably everything. I'm probably just like describing regular human nature at this point. But yeah, totally like a classic example of going, pre-digital to post-digital.
Absolutely. So let's get to the heart and soul of what you do as a serial entrepreneur and product leader, and that's what you have on paper. But if I put you in front of a bunch of sixth graders at career day, and the kid in the back of the room is like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer him?
Yeah, yeah, that's like my kryptonite. I feel like a little bit like every time I'm talking to somebody, or if I'm in an Uber, or even at a networking event, I probably should be better at this, honestly, by this point. But they're like, "What do you do?" And it's like I'm always like, "All right, how much context does this person have on into this world?" Because it's like it's super, it's not like it's not inaccessible, but I'm kind of like sometimes I'm just like I realize I can just say like I do computers, and they're like, "Okay, cool." Um, so I think that the kind of like the earnest effort to like bring this 6-year-old into what I do is like I kind of fall back more on the entrepreneurship side.
Yep.
And the very simple version of that is like I look for problems that exist that don't have a great solution to them, and I try to make that solution, and I try to then what I find to be even harder than making the solution is then I try to get that solution into the hands of the people that need it. And so that's kind of like the very when I think about like what I'm every day when I wake up, what I'm trying to do, that's kind of the key thing that I come back to.
So, what did you want to be in the sixth grade? What was your dream life?
Oh man. I think I wanted to be a dinosaur. I think that I don't know if I had great, so my dad was always into computers when I was growing up, and
Okay.
so I think I was very fortunate to always be around at least a little bit of technology. We had the internet pretty early, and so I think I when I was younger, I almost kind of felt like I was going to get into the technology space, even to the fact I mentioned I was in a band for a little bit, and I kind of did when I went to community college. I got a degree in music, and I think that was like I wasn't like rebelling necessarily because it was kind of like it's like a self-imposed like thing, but I'm like, well, I think that the rationalization is like, well, I'm going to go and try this music thing for a little bit because I know I can always come back and get a tech job, which
Yeah.
was totally untrue at the time. Like there was like no guarantee that was going to happen, but that actually is what happened. So I think I kind of always knew since I was young that I was going to wind up doing something with technology, kind of also at the time not knowing what technology was going to be in, 30 years from then.
What was the first computer that you really sunk into that blew your mind, that you kind of got your feet wet with?
Yeah, I know we had a 486 at the
Okay.
house that I was interacting with. I remember my kind of the first computer that was like mine. I had a one of my uncles was building a two-story addition onto his house, like a basement and a first floor addition. And I worked for a whole summer to buy a compact computer. One, I don't know if you remember, they were like really like big and bubbly,
Huh?
and that was like my first computer that I had. And so I remember it was able to I don't know why I sometimes like I don't know where my car keys are, but like I remember like there was a video game I wanted to play this video game called Tribes 2 that
Yeah.
wouldn't run on my old computer, and I still remember turning that computer on and loading it up and like having the game run, and like that was like my first computer, and I put in 3 months of like mixing concrete. It was a terrible deal
Right.
actually in retrospect for me. That was like mixing concrete, hauling 80-pound bags, and I'm not like yeah, I know we're on video and you're probably assuming, but I'm not a physical specimen. I'm a pretty small guy, and so yeah, it was like that was probably the hardest thing I'd ever done at that
Yeah.
point in my life to like go through 3 months of intense like physical labor, and also like I'm like totally unskilled. Like, hey, like we need you to like whatever. We had to jackhammer through concrete. There's a concrete slab, and I remember like I learned at that point that the jackhammer is like really easy going down. The hard part is picking the thing back up to reset it.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, so that was kind of like the first computer that was like, yeah, that was like my computer, that I worked for, and I
Yeah.
I earned potentially a few times over.
That's wonderful. So let's get into the music. What was the first live show, live concert you saw that blew you away, that made you think, I want to do this?
Man, what a great question. It's such a good question because I remember I think as a kid you're exposed to a lot of live music that's like I think I saw like a Monkeys cover band or something like it just kind of like there's just sort of like and even like kids TV there's a lot of there's a lot of like live music and musical performance and stuff like that, but I feel like it doesn't really grab you. I'm trying to remember what it must have been. I think probably what it was more listening and hearing music that wasn't on the radio.
Yeah.
I think that beyond seeing like a live performance, hearing music that, kind of things like, wait, like you can do that, and especially going through high school and trying to thinking of like what bands there were. I mean, these were the things that are coming to mind are all sort of like radio bands, but kind of like the Linkin Park, Godsmack, like Slipknot. Slipknot, I don't think was on the radio. Hearing music like that, I'm like, whoa, like I think it was like not to like blow it out of proportion, but like even just in like in music, I'm like, wow, it's incredible that you're able to do this. But I think it was also kind of as a young person hearing that, I think kind of unlocks a little bit of a door of like, wait, like there's a phrase now like you can just you can just do things.
Yeah.
And so like that was kind of my first experience of like, wait, like yeah, you can like you don't have to sound if you want to be a musician, you don't have to sound like other people. You can just make really frankly in retrospect the weirdest possible noises possible and record them and then you can send it out and hundreds of thousands or millions of people will listen to it. So I think that was kind of the thing where I'm like, oh, this is like really interesting. There's almost a limitless potential here to what you can do. And so I think that's really what drew me into like, oh, well, maybe I can do that. Maybe I can get into that.
So I have a jazz radio show. I interview musicians and I come from it from a visceral standpoint. I don't play an instrument. I mean, I can mess around and noodle around a little bit on the drums and whatnot, but I don't,
Sure.
I haven't, I don't read music. I don't think in music.
Hmm.
So I'm going to build this Venn diagram. And you got one side that's right brain to a certain degree of doing music, and then
Yep.
you got the left brain, which is the technology and getting into all of these levels of computers.
Hmm.
Those Venn diagrams are going to intersect. How have both of those worlds benefited you? How has knowing music benefited technology and technology vice versa?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think there's sort of the overall, the overall perspective of like what sort of each of those two fields teach you, just kind of like as a person. But there's also the direct application too, which is like this was the when I was going through music and when I was going through college, I got to take a class on like electronic music, which was we were exposed to like Pro Tools and like this was like brand new stuff. This was
Yeah,
like, hey, like it was like, hey, this program called Pro Tools is coming out. We really think it's going to be a big deal. And I always I don't talk about my education very much, but I kind of always sort of laugh looking back. I went to Harvard Community College in Maryland, and I got a music degree there, a 2-year degree in music. And I think one semester I had like 5 or 6 people with their doctorates in their musical field. I was like, I got an insane education to the point where they recognized that this tech change was coming. But anyway, back to your question. So I think that the tech and music overlap was happening in a big way directly of like, hey, like we can record music digitally. In a funny way, MySpace was happening. So it's like, hey, if you had the tech chops, if you could record the music like from your bedroom, it's kind of like the first time this ever happened. Like you didn't have to go down to a studio and pay $400 an hour. And most of the bands that was kind of the world that was happening right before we got into that scene. And
yeah,
so usually the albums recorded that way kind of sucked because you're like, well, we can only do like 1 or 2 takes, guys. Like we can't afford to, like we can just kind of like get 1 or 2 takes out, and we can't afford this, this studio time.
yeah,
But so I think that was kind of the direct application of like literally those two fields were just kind of colliding at that point in time, and you
sure.
could, go from idea to recorded to produced to out the door
Yeah,
to feedback. It's kind of the first time people started like that was kind of changed too of like people you can release a song on MySpace. And I think there are probably other places too, but that was kind of the big spot.
sure.
And you can get feedback on it and hear, see what people like, didn't like, and then you can just go and make the next song instead of having to produce an album.
Yeah,
And so, that as you can kind of tell, that kind of looks a lot like what technology looks like of like you release a product, you're trying to solve a problem, you get feedback from customers, you improve it or you give up on it and go on to the next thing. And so, yeah, I think that that's also sort of the lessons learned from being, kind of in those two different worlds of it's also very difficult to be a musician
Yeah.
And I'm sure you talk to a lot of musicians, and especially touring is like mind-blowingly boring and also terrifying, at the same time of like you're driving place to place. I remember one instance that we were playing a show in I think maybe it was like Georgia, and their next show was like at the very bottom of Florida. So it was like a 13-hour drive. And so it's like, we played the show and we're basically like, hey, we kind of almost have to like drive overnight to get there.
Yeah.
And then you drive out there, and then, in this particular case, like, oh, you guys didn't hear the show was canceled. And we're like, oh my God. And so it's like, all right, well, now we went from like kind of like really stressing and trying to get down here to well, now we basically have nothing to do.
Yeah.
And you just went right from terror directly into boredom. So I think like doing something really hard was really beneficial for me. I kind of had like not necessarily like a sheltered, yeah, this I kind of had like a nothing, no major strife, no major issues growing up. And especially like personally, I didn't really do sports.
Yeah.
So I kind of, again, obviously looking back, I wish I would have done more sports and competition. And I kind of just did like computer stuff and music stuff. Um, so I think doing something really hard was like super good. I think that like rearranged some neurons in my brain to be like, okay, cool. Like this is like what the hard stuff feels like. And this is the reward that you get
Yeah.
on the other side for having done that hard stuff.
So who's been a hero? Who's been an inspirational force for you?
Yeah, wow. What a great question. It's interesting because man, there actually is a lot of overlap because I feel like kind of music and technology at the same time. You have kind of a lot of these people that you kind of look at from afar, and like as I'm a guitarist, and so like you kind of look at people who are doing things. It's wasn't he wasn't around back then, but there's this guy Tim Henson. I don't know if you know him,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Polyphia guy.
Yeah.
And so I don't know quite to a hero level, but like I think that he's somebody that embodies like musically. I'm like, oh, you're just doing something totally different,
Yeah.
and you're just kind of, and it's like very, very good too. A lot of people do something totally different, and it unfortunately sucks.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I look at on the tech side, you know, kind of looking at the people there, it sort of reminds me of I heard this phrase a long time ago about people making movies, and they were talking about like how like there's this discourse for a while that like movies were bad, like modern movies were bad, and the person made the point it's like it's a miracle that a good movie ever gets made.
Yeah.
Like it's just incredible. Like you have to go through writing the script,
Yep.
casting it, those actors have to show up every day, and then someone's like it's like there's like 5,000 people involved or whatever, and so I kind of feel the same way about businesses now. It's like it's kind of incredible that a good business even gets built. And there's
Yeah.
always like more room for improvement. Um, so I don't know, I kind of learned lessons from, little bits and pieces here and there from a little bit of everybody. It's
Yeah.
very difficult to get like tech business advice, I find, because there's just so many people in the space that have never done anything. But you occasionally find like an Alex Hormozy figure or a Dan Martell type guy,
Yeah.
or literally just those two guys. And it's people who have been through the process many times before and have kind of dedicated themselves to like putting actual useful advice out there. Um, and so I don't know, I kind of really appreciate what both of those guys do, and I really like, especially I've followed Dan for a long time, and he's kind of like I don't know, he's kind of got like a an ethical core about him as well, which is like again not always you can't always guarantee that when you're dealing with people in business. It always seems like a little bit cliche, but when you're making decisions in the moment, unless you're really putting ethics at the very forefront of what you're doing, it's like it can be easy to like do things that are not like we're not talking about committing fraud, but you can do slightly unethical things all the time. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of cool to see people that sort of balance that. How can we grow as fast as possible? How can we make the right decisions? How can we do all the right stuff? And at the same time, like, hey, like, well, we need to have some sort of like code of conduct, and we have some sort of, which is in the moment going to mean growing slower or
Yeah.
doing worse, which people don't realize. It's like, it's not about like, you don't get to like, usually people don't make the unethical decision because it's going to be worse for them. They're going to
Right.
make the unethical decision because it's better for them. And, if that's kind of the only way that you measure success within what you're doing, again, it becomes easier to do that stuff. So I don't know. I just find that both the combination of putting yourself out there, dedicating yourself to, training other people up and, kind of the pay it forward thing. I'm a mentor. We have a local incubator here, and I'm the entrepreneur in residence there. And so, I really enjoy taking the time to provide advice for people and doing it in a very like open and transparent way of like the reason why I'm able to give you this advice is because I've made the mistakes that you're making right now. And like if I can just save you two or three mistakes and get you there a little bit faster than how I got there, then I'll be super satisfied. So that to me I think is really like really noble and really like really valuable. I think it's kind of like really frankly necessary for like if we're going to continue to improve as a species, like we have to kind of like have some people that are going to raise their hand and be like, hey, I'm going to dedicate myself to kind of helping the next generation get better at, the things that I've done.
So how do you balance all of this? Being an entrepreneur, taking care of your own soul, your own life, your own self.
Mhm.
What motivates you every day to wake up to do that?
Yeah, I don't know that I do a great job of balancing. I was like literally thinking about that this morning before we got on the call, where I was like, I feel like moderation is something that I don't do a great job with, and I think that's kind of a weakness. 'Cause I think it's a little bit of a crutch to be like, all right, it's like all or nothing. It's like like if you're dieting, it's like okay, some people be like I only eat protein now, that's it. It's exclusively protein, or they'll be like yeah, I'm on like a whatever keto diet, or for me it's like hey, it's like it's either like hey, I do like no snacks, no sweet treats,
Yeah.
or it's like if I'm doing any, I'm doing all of them. So
Uh-huh.
so that's kind of how I thought about that's kind of my perception on balance is like I don't again, I probably should work on those, frankly, but I don't do a great job of kind of doing like, okay, it's going to be like 25% this and 25% business and then 25% like physical, fitness and then 25%, whatever. Usually it's like, all right, it's going to be 100% in this direction for a while. And then when I need to kind of switch it up, then it's 100% in the next direction of like,
Yeah.
okay, it's like, um, instead of, taking 5 minute breaks throughout the day. It's going to be like, all right, we're just going to like work straight through. And then when it's time to rest, it's time to rest, kind of that sort of thing. I can't tell if that's like, again, if that's something that I should just do a better job with,
Right.
or if that's just the way that I'm kind of wired to be like,
Yeah.
yeah, you're kind of just like an all or nothing type person. And so like, maybe it's going to be easier for me if I just lean into that and just like
Right.
let that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me ask you this. If you walked into a room of everybody that knows you from entrepreneur standpoint, and you swim through that group of people and go up to a podium, and you can tell that room one fun thing about you, one fun fact, one fun story, something that would humanize you to them,
Oh
what
yeah.
would you tell that room?
Yeah, wow. What a great. I mean, you've unintentionally kind of pulled out a lot of the fun stories out of me from kind of starting from the beginning with like because I don't think most people in my life know that I've had this like prior life as a musician.
Sure.
And there's like endless stories from there of just like, you know, I do think it's possible that a lot of those people we're describing in that room probably think I really have my stuff together and I'm super sharp and I've got the right answer to everything. But, it's like there was one day where we were on tour and we were in South Carolina and I think we were heading to Georgia and like we went to bed and we woke up and the next day we were in North Carolina. It's like, hey, wait a second. We've gone to, even if you don't have a great grasp of geography of the United States, if you're going south from South Carolina and you wind up in North Carolina, that's not good. Or one time we were frequently as a band that was kind of as destitute as we were, people would say like, hey, like, well, if you want to crash at our place, you can do that. And we were, usually pretty quick to take them up on that. That's actually something, and no, it's not exactly your point, but I think another lesson from that time is like, I think people have a different perception of like, is the average person good or average person bad or, selfish or whatever. And that experience really sort of solidified to me. And like, I think at the core, if you could really like put each individual person, in a room and we could like scan them, like I think the average person is good at their
Yeah.
core and they want to do the right thing. And I think there's a lot of circumstances as to why we don't do. It kind of almost goes back to the ethics question
Yeah.
too. But yeah, anyway, so one time we were one fine gentleman was letting us sleep at his place. And he's like, hey, like you guys can crash here. We actually have like a lot of like extra rooms, and so it's not a big issue. But you guys, he was just really adamant, like you guys got to be out of here by like 8 or whatever. Like, and we're like, yeah, sure. Like we'll do like literally whatever you want to do, because the other choice is sleeping in the van, So it's like, yeah, we'll wake up and get out whenever you want. And to make a long story short, we were like, it just kind of seemed a little bit. He was like so specific of like, you have to be out of here by this specific time. Like, why do you need to get out of here? He's like, oh, I have a court date. I'm like, oh boy. And so we like, obviously that sparked a conversation, and we're like, what's your? He's like, yeah, I kind of like stabbed a guy. I'm like, all right, well, and then the kind of the cherry on top. That's you if you wrote it in a movie, it would be too silly. But like we were all kind of in another room. We were kind of like huddled together, like, all right, let's go like watch each other's backs.
Yep.
That kind of also helps you understand what the situation's like. It's like, well, maybe one of us will get stabbed, but at least won't be sleeping in the
Yeah.
van for another night.
Yeah.
And he's like, hey, there's a bunk bed in my room. Like somebody can sleep there. And I turn around, and like all my bandmates have like done like the one step back thing. And so the fast forward to me like sleeping, really not sleeping on the
Yeah.
top bunk of of a gentleman who's got a court date for stabbing somebody. It's like
Oh no.
eyes wide
Uh-huh.
open.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
So
funny.
I would probably share something along those lines
Yeah.
to help people know that I've made despite a series of unwise decisions, I've made it through, and everybody else is probably starting off further forward than where I started.
So at the end of the day, Brian, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, colleagues, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Yeah, I think that I'm still figuring it out, as I've mentioned a few times. I think there's still more to uncover. I think that some of the things I've learned about myself that I didn't necessarily think, just like mentioned when I was younger, I didn't do a lot of sports and a lot of competitions. I've learned that I'm a very competitive person. And so I think when I was younger, I didn't think I was very competitive. And I think I was just bad at competing, which is a real distinction. And so, yeah, I've kind of just learned to appreciate that I'm a competitive person, and I like to also give back. And I value fairness to probably like a unnecessary degree. And yeah, and I think that I'm also kind of if you can't tell, I'm like I obviously value levity, and I also feel like there's just kind of like nothing there's like so few things um, that merit the level of seriousness that a lot of people walk around with on a daily basis. Especially again, being in technology, there's a lot of like self-importance
Yeah.
that happens. And in entrepreneurship, it's like you're curing cancer, and some entrepreneurs are curing cancer. So like that's actually awesome. Like we should do that. And so yeah, I think that's kind of the final thing of just like having a sense of levity. I find is really important. I think
Yeah.
most things go a little bit better if everybody's got a smile
Yep.
on or laughing. And so yeah, I just really value that, and it's something I kind of always want to, I want to, I don't want to be super serious either. So like that's kind of the environment that I want to create.
I dig it. So if anyone wants to reach out, they have any questions, they want to learn more, how do they do it? What's the good business?
Cool. Yeah. I'm on the app formerly known as Twitter, but actually, what? One way that might be a good way, if anybody's got any questions on this or they want to reach out, they can just email me directly. It's
Okay.
just my first and last name at gmail.com. Got on Gmail very very early to get an actual name out of it, and so yeah. Please feel free if any of this is interesting or you wanna chat more. I'd love to. Always trying to clear out the inbox. So yeah, happy to chat with anybody.
Okay, I will put all that in the show notes. Brian, this has been wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for your story. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah, and thanks for the great questions. It was really fun to kind of go back and think through some of these things. So
Totally. Yeah. Anytime people can talk about music, if that's kind of a place in their lives they get to revisit, it always brings that sparkle out. So it was a joy, man. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks
Cool.
so much, Joe.
Thank you. Take care. Hello, friends. Joe Dimino here. I just wanted to let you know that after 30 years or so, I have finally released my first book of poetry through the mighty Spartan Press here in Kansas City, Missouri. As the creator and host of both Neon Jazz Radio and the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino podcast, along with being a visual artist, I'm ready to embark on a new adventure and want you to be a part of it. You can get a copy online via Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and actually on the streets in Kansas City at the great Prospero's bookstore off 39th
Street. You can also visit joedimino.com for links to the book, to more poetry, and everything in my world, including paintings. Thanks for all of the love and support over the years, and please dig the words.